قصدت باب الرجاء والناس قد رقدوا وبت أشكو إلى مولاي ماجد.
On the eve of mid-Rajab, year 492 after the Hijrah, which befalls the 7th of June, 1099 of the Common Era, Frankish forces took Jerusalem under siege, marking the beginning of what came to be known as the First Crusade. The Holy City, under Fatimid rule at that time, was besieged for 70 days, witnessing bloody battles and many arduous attempts at penetration. Then, on the 23rd of Sha'ban, or the 15th of August, the Holy City fell into the hands of invaders for the first time since its liberation in the dawn of the Islamic Empire, under the leadership of Umar bin Khattab several hundred years ago. The Crusaders massacred tens of thousands of people within the walls of Jerusalem, killing men, women, and even children, plundering and pillaging everything that came in sight. Three crusades and 91 lunar or 88 solar years later, Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi and his faithful forces would succeed in recapturing the Holy City from the Crusaders on the 27th of Rajab in the 583rd year after the fateful Hijrah, or October the 2nd in the year 1187 of the Common Era. It would come to be one of the greatest days in the history of the Islamic Empire.
When the Crusaders arrived, they wiped out 70,000 people in 1 week and turned the Aqsa Mosque, the noble sanctuary, into a church, a stable, and a warehouse. Here, the Muslim conscience, not just Saladin's but also that of every single Muslim, cannot help but be enraged for the sake of Jerusalem, as it has been the foremost symbol of the struggle between Western colonization and the Eastern world.
Recapturing Jerusalem was unlike any other military attack led by Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi. It was in fact the fruit of a very well thought out process of transformation in the very foundations of society at that time. The preparation for this turning point started many years before the actual liberation of the Holy City. It was led by the biggest of scholars and reformers of those times, and gave rise to a new generation of leaders who took upon themselves the mission of bringing about change and transformation and reuniting the Muslim nation under one empire. The Zangid dynasty played the major role in this process through its many schools and institutions, and through the efforts of its great leaders, specifically Imad ad-Din and later Nur ad-Din Zenki. Saladin, on the other hand, played the major part in executing the mission with the support of many scholars and influential people.
One of the most important merits of Saladin, may Allah have mercy on his beloved soul, is that he followed in the steps of Nur ad-Din Zenki in his war with the Crusaders and his devotion to the Holy Land. Nur ad-Din's whole life revolved around one ambition, and that was to liberate Jerusalem. He was prepared to martyr himself for that.
He wanted to reclaim Jerusalem because Jerusalem, in our Islamic consciousness, is the first of the two Qiblas, the direction in which Muslims pray, and the third of the holiest cities. And if there is one common ambition within the heart of every Muslim, it is to take part in the deliverance of the Holy City. And so Saladin was followed by swarms of volunteers from all over the world. He knew well that as soon as he frees Jerusalem, he will have acquired a legion of conquering armies, and it will turn in the eyes of all a colonizing army, and that's what happened.
The Zangids were able to free many areas and cities from the Crusader invasions, and the Holy City was at the crux of the matter. But they knew that this city was unlike any other city, for it required special preparation, which Saladin strived to achieve and did so after Nur ad-Din Zenki passed away.
Saladin had a strategy that has endured throughout the course of Islamic history to this very day. When there is a foreign object, or so to speak, implanted deep within the heart of the nation, it is necessary and inevitable to overcome this foreign object, to extract it, tear it out, and in order to do so, it must be encircled. You see, we are speaking of the Ring of Arab countries. This also existed in the time of Saladin, who fought for 7 years to unite these states that were located around the Crusader entity.
The most important step that enabled the actualization of this historical turning point was the political and military unity between Egypt and the Levant, following the end of the Fatimid dynasty in Egypt and the death of Nur ad-Din Zenki in Damascus.
There is a very important lesson to be learned from Saladin's biography, and we must assimilate this lesson in this present time. Before Saladin confronted the Crusaders with a decisive battle, he realized that he must first unite the surrounding countries of the Levant. Salah ad-Din is considered to have been quick in amassing his armies and bringing together the dispersed people into a united whole, and this is one of his merits, that he was indeed aware that a battle cannot be won at once, it must be fought in several rounds.
First of all, Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi possessed a unique talent in leadership. He was a clever man with a mind for strategy. He was a man of faith. He carried a clear message and was on a holy mission. He was very quick to learn on the battlegrounds, but he was also merciful, compassionate, and just with his army and people, he often prayed and called upon his Maker, the Almighty, with invocations and supplications.
Parallel to these crucial political endeavors, there was much preparation on the military front. This was perhaps the largest military operation of its kind in the history of the region, for they built many castles and fortifications, naval bases, and battleship and weapon factories.
Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi was a richly cultivated man. He had a great military finesse. He knew well the different cultures of his people and the cultures of his counterparts and enemies. He knew that his plan would entail complicated politics and would defeat enemies and be defeated, perhaps several times. He was a well-learned man. He would lead his army himself and fight at the front, not sit and order from afar. He used to lead the armies himself.
Saladin's economic measures sought to ease expenses on people and fight corruption. Thus, the general public was at ease, which helped pave the way towards a greater goal to prepare for the face-off with the Crusaders. This was accompanied by motivational campaigns led by large teams of scholars and thinkers, of which were predecessors as well as contemporaries of Saladin's.
Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi, according to Baha'u'ddin ibn Shaddad, was able to spread very strongly amongst his people the sentiment of jihad, or striving for the sake of Allah, as all the talk was about jihad. I quote from Ibn Shaddad's book on Saladin: I used to pass by shops where old men would be sitting outside talking about striving. I used to pass by young men riding reeds and running about as if they were on the horses of jihad. And I used to pass by old women who would be baking in their kilns, wondering amongst each other, when will we bake bread for the mujahideen?
The erection of schools in Egypt, Iraq, and the Levant, and redirecting Silawi towards creating high morale and instilling a sense of nationalism that both played a huge role in preparing for the repossession of all lands.
This is the site where the Salahiyya school once stood. It was actually built under the patronage of Nur ad-Din Zenki and eventually extended by Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi.
Schools were like cities at that time, each comprising of 4 wings. Each wing houses one of the 4 doctrines, or mainstream schools of thought in Islam. Each school contained a mosque and dormitories for the students. It was considered a city of its own.
One of the most important decisions that Saladin took in the field of education was changing the Fatimid syllabus that was still used at Al-Azhar Institute in Egypt.
When Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi arrived at Al-Azhar, he did not wish to see this mosque continuing in that fashion, and so he stopped the congregational prayer there, not under a political or abusive premise, but according to fatwa or juridical verdict from the great scholar Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i, who said that according to the Shafi'i jurisprudence it is not permissible to perform 2 separate congregational prayers in the same vicinity, and so based upon this verdict it was moved to the Al-Hakim Mosque.
He transformed the Azhar. The Azhar was a Shiite mosque. He shut it down for 5 years, until he completely changed its syllabi and programs and changed them into the Sunni school of thought.
Before heading to Jerusalem, Saladin waged many battles with the Crusader kingdoms that were spread along the area between Antakya to the north and Aqaba in the south, freeing many cities from the Crusaders. He then began to gather his forces near the northern parts of Palestine. Saladin spread his military recruitments in between the south of Syria and the north of Jordan, westward to the northern parts of the Jordan Valley near the Sea of Galilee. The larger number of these recruitments were in Jordan, specifically in what is today known as Khirbat al-Samra.
We are here, as you can see, in the Al-Khirbat al-Samra, not very far from the train station of the Hijaz railway lines. This area was named Al-Khirbat al-Samra because of the black volcanic rocks that you can see at the top of that hill, and so the area derived its name from that hill. The Khirbat al-Samra town lies on the edge of the wider Jordan Rift Valley, stretching west towards the Jordan Valley, known as the Agwa al-Urdun, and through there one can pass into the north of Palestine.
The very nature of this area is the reason why Saladin chose it as a venue for gathering and recruiting his forces.
Perhaps this is the reason which made Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi, may Allah be pleased with him, choose the Al-Khirbat al-Samra as a camp for his forces, where he could travel through the Jordan Valley to the Zarqa stream towards the north of Palestine and Jerusalem, with very little in the way of effort.
To the north of Palestine, in the area stretching from the Sea of Galilee to the Galilee Heights, a decisive battle took place, paving the way for the repossession of the Holy City. It is known as the Battle of Hattin, after the ancient volcano in the area. The Battle of Hattin took place on the 14th of Rabi' al-Thani, in the year 583 after Hijrah, or the 3rd of June, in the year 1187 CE. Losing this battle was disastrous for the Crusaders. They lost most of their cavalry, and many of their generals and soldiers were killed or taken hostage, amongst them even the Crusader king of Jerusalem and the keeper of the Karak Crusader fort.
Saladin chose the right time in terms of the situation in the Crusader kingdom, as there were some internal issues. He also chose the perfect location for the Battle of Hattin, and he mindfully chose the scorching summer and cut the water supplies to the Crusaders, trapping them in a tight fist, closing in on them.
The Battle of Hittin paved way for a glorious and unforgettable event in which Saladin claimed victory in the 583rd year after Hijrah. He triumphed over the Crusaders in the month of Rajab.
Saladin's armies did not stop after this great victory. They went on to free numerous other cities of Palestine from the Crusader rule, as their defenses were crumbling fast.
Saladin will live on in Arab history to be the only one to possess this military superiority in talent. His ability to free 52 Arab cities under occupation, single-handedly. And I say this now because there is an accusation against Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi, alleging that his victories were on paper. A few schools of history are now making these claims.
After less than 3 months from the victory of Hittin, Saladin's armies were brimming around the walls of Jerusalem. The siege lasted 12 days, and its severity added to killing the morale amongst the Crusaders in the light of the outcome of the Battle of Hittin, which led the Frankish community within the city to wave the flag of surrender. And so the Muslim army entered the city, led by Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi, on Friday, the 27th of Rajab, in the year 583 after Hijri, or the 2nd of October of the year 1187 CE, after the night commemorating the ascension of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to the heavens and the holy sanctuary, known as Al-Isra wal-Ma'raj.
When Saladin entered Jerusalem in the year 583 after Hijrah, freeing the city on the 26th of Rajab, when he entered the holy sanctuary, he set the ideological cornerstone for a new era in the Islamic Empire. That this existence of European forces in our lands is colonization, occupation, and that the Holy Land has returned to its rightful possessors, a land of worship for Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike, where no one can be stopped from worshipping here. And as for these colonizing armies, we now have every right to set the earth aflame from below and above, within and without its forts, and in Raha and Acre and Jaffa, and every inch of the land that has been fortified, because these were nothing but sites of occupation for them, devoid of any purpose. This is how Saladin led his struggle to free Jerusalem.
The Muslim army rushed to cleanse and purify the Aqsa Mosque and the noble Dome of the Rock of all profanities and desecration left behind by the Crusaders. Saladin placed the rostrum that was ordered by Nur-ad-Din Zenki to replace the one burnt by the Jews in the year 96 CE, and the first Friday prayer was held after the liberation of Jerusalem.
Saladin himself, along with his princes and sons and government officials and scholars, all went into the holy sanctuary to remove all traces of the Crusader rule and scented the air with the rose water to purify from the stench of wine and debauchery. It was indeed a great day.
Saladin showed a strange benevolence towards the Western population that had occupied the city, which came to them as a surprise after all the massacres and atrocities they had committed.
Saladin's attention to all religious relics and monuments sprouts from his piety and modesty. It came from his knowledge of the spiritual worth of Jerusalem and the Aqsa Mosque, so he renovated and rebuilt not just the holy sites, but also the rest of the city. He ordered building schools and institutes, infrastructure, shelters, and hospitals. If we compare the Crusaders and Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi, we'll see a great difference between them. For when the Crusaders invaded Jerusalem, they killed everyone in sight. Muslim blood flowed like rivers through the streets of the holy city. along with the blood of everyone else.
He had this concept, not to provoke the other side, never to provoke the enemies, unless they were the ones to start the agitation. It is not known to anyone that Saladin may have committed a massacre. It was never heard that he ever mistreated hostages. Even the Europeans admit to this very day that he was tolerant, and some of the Arab and Muslim historians have raised a finger or two, but Saladin was never one to like bloodbaths on a personal level.
After 6 years of planning and striving to free the holy city, Saladin passed away as though fate had brought him through this magnificent journey right on time. He was buried in Damascus next to the Grand Umayyad Mosque.
We are standing here in front of the mausoleum of the hero Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi, who passed away in the year 589 Hijri. He was first buried in an area called Qadam, but then was moved here to the vicinity called Kalasa. This area lies north of the Umayyad Mosque.
Saladin passed away when he was only 51. Having made all of these great achievements, he united the Arab land that was torn from Kairouan to the farthest reaches of Yemen. He eradicated sectarianism and heresy, internal afflictions, and all very peacefully, without injustice or bloodshed, and then he went on to defeat the Crusader kingdoms, one after the other, retrieving at the end the Holy Aqsa Mosque, and after conquering all of these kingdoms, Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi passed away, with no more than 12 dinars to his name.
Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi will surely be a guiding light in processes of peace and war with them.
Salah Aldeen Al Ayyoubi is a name that no one can ever forget. It will stay engraved in our minds and in our hearts as the name of one of the greatest men in the history of Islam.